All right, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. This is Panama Bartholomew with the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and welcome to the Building Decarbonization Coalition Presents webinar series. Today's session is going to be on residential electrification cost effectiveness, when we're very excited to have Amber Mahone from E3 Consultants to come and present to us. What we're going to do is I'm going to give a brief introduction to the Building Decarbonization Coalition. And then we are going to have Stephen Torres from Southern California Edison, one of the funders of the study that Amber is going to present, give a little bit of background about why they funded this effort and how they see it being used. And then we'll hand it over to Amber. Everybody is on mute currently. We had a large registration for the event, and so there's too many people to trust to not have on mute. And so you'll all be on mute and you'll be able to ask questions via chat. I'll be monitoring chat questions and then offering them to Amber at the end. She'll speak till about 10 minutes from the top of the hour and answer a number of questions, and then she'll be available for follow-up questions individually as well. So thank you all for joining. The Building Decarbonization Coalition is a nonprofit organization. We're made up of energy providers, manufacturers, developers, designers, real estate, local governments, and non-governmental organizations. It's a large membership group that all works to eliminate greenhouse gases from the built environment. What you see up on the screen is our current membership of fantastic members, and I want to thank all the members that are on the phone today for all the support. We released a roadmap in right at the end of January, beginning of February, titled "A Roadmap to Decarbonize California Buildings." And in that, we called for a number of different, called on the state to take on a number of different goals in order to meet our overall goal of eliminating greenhouse gases from the built environment. That includes getting us to a residential zero-emission building code by 2025 for residential buildings and for commercial buildings by 2028. And then through a retrofit program by 2045, getting us to 100% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from the built environment. And then a number of goals around high efficiency heat pumps for space heating and for water heating. And that by 2030, getting us to 100% share of sales from heat pump technology, so that by 2045, we would have turned over the entire stock in California and been able to get to zero emission buildings statewide. Part of that roadmap is we adopted 5 major goals and suggested 5 major goals for the state in order to meet those numerical targets. And they are about building awareness of all stakeholders engaged in building decarbonization, ensuring that customers receive a good value proposition and builders and installers do as well. Making sure that the supply chain is prepared for the scale of market transformation that we're seeing is needed, and getting barriers out of the way of that supply chain, and then aligning all of our policies to meet other goals. And so we as a coalition are working together on a whole stream of different activities in order to support these goals. And this webinar series is part of that effort. We think there's a real benefit about bringing top speakers like Amber and top firms like E3 to the masses to talk about some of the best research, some of the best products, some of the best work that's going on out there across the country to not only our members, but to folks that are not yet members of the Building Decarbonization Coalition. So this webinar series directly comes back to 2 of our goals about raising awareness and then seeking to align policies to meet our goals of decarbonization by identifying what are some of those policies that are needed and then working together to try to get those policies implemented. And so we're really excited to have Amber and E3. We're very excited to have all of you engaged as well. If you are not part of the Building Decarbonization Coalition yet, we would welcome you joining us. There's no cost to join for most of the rest of the year. It's an incredible forum of leaders across all those sectors that I mentioned, working together on both market and policy solutions. And so we'd welcome your organization into the coalition, very low barrier to entry. And you can, at this website that you see up on the screen, feel free to use that website to join the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and we can pull you into all of our activities. I am now going to turn it over to Stephen Torres to talk about the study that we are going to be discussing today. So Stephen, if you could please hit *6 on your phone if you're calling in from your phone, or hit the unmute button on the screen to get ready as I introduce you. Stephen Torres is the Strategic Planning Senior Advisor at Southern California Edison. He's been deeply engaged in this space for years and is leading some of the efforts around decarbonization and the power pathways for Southern California Edison. And I'm going to hand it over to Stephen to now talk about this study that they hired E3 to work on with some other partners, why they did it, and what their hope it's going to be used for. So Stephen, thank you so much for joining, and I turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. If not, please let me know, and I'll try to speak louder. So thanks for having me on the program, Panama. Let me just kind of give you a funder's perspective to the study. So first, from an SCE perspective, just to give you some context, our initial clean energy decarbonization pathways work that was completed in 2017 indicated that from a carbon abatement cost perspective, electrification of residential space and water heating uses were quite cost effective. Furthermore, some preliminary total cost of ownership modeling that we perform on these two end uses pointed to about a 30% penetration being achievable by 2030. And that was really the basis of or base assumption for our decarbonization pathways. As we turn here internally to, from strategy to implementation, we wanted to take a deeper dive into some of the key variables driving the economics of residential building electrification, specifically as it relates to building envelopes, climate zones, and actual costs. Our partners, the folks at LADWP, were also looking to better inform their future building electrification goals. So they also saw the value of further studying the key economic drivers associated with residential building electrification in some of the climate zones in their service territories. SMUD was a bit ahead of SCE and LADWP in terms of their building electrification efforts. But again, we're interested in seeing how BE would evolve statewide. So we partner the three electric utilities, Southern California Edison, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and Sacramento Municipal Utility District. We partner to fund the study and selected E3 given E3 expertise in this area, as well as their foundation work on decarbonization pathways that was previously conducted with CEC. In terms of sort of key contributions, in addition to the findings that Amber's going to present, I want to highlight the rigorous approach we took at estimating total cost of installing these appliances. We came to our initial scope of work call for reviewing third-party sources for this type of information. And what we found is that third-party sources for this type of information do not exist. So we literally hire professional estimators to do line item by line item cost estimates for installing both gas appliances as well as electric building electrification appliances for both new construction and for retrofits. And if nothing else, we think that contribution will inform many activities, studies, and analysis going forward. So with that, thank you for having us, and be happy to answer any further questions at the end as this seminar progresses.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for being on the webinar. Thank you for your partnership in the coalition, and particularly thank you for funding this really great piece of work. So I'm going to stop sharing right now and let Amber bring up her screen. This is the first webinar in our Building Decarbonization Coalition Presents webinar series. This is being recorded, and it will be made available, the recording is made available to members of the coalition on our website. That's one of just the many, many benefits you get from being a member of the coalition. So please do come in and join the coalition, added to our mailing list and our activities. Amber is a is a giant within the building decarbonization community. We're really excited to have her talk. They have been putting out significant reports in this space for years now, and this is just the most recent and some fantastic work that I think is going to be really impactful on our activities moving forward. So thank you for joining, Amber, and I hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Panama, for the introduction. Can you hear me okay and see the slides?
We can.
Okay, great. And I want to also acknowledge my co-authors of this study. Charles Lee is here in the room with me and did an amazing job on the analysis. And we are also supported by Point Energy Innovations and Frontier Energy on technology screening and building simulations, and by AECOM on the capital cost estimations that Stephen introduced. So I'll give a quick overview of the study and the methodology, spend a little bit of time talking about the consumer economics from the perspective of capital costs, bill savings, and life cycle savings, and then end with a brief discussion of the greenhouse gas savings from building electrification and potential grid impacts from residential building electrification, and end with some conclusions and recommendations. So this is a representation of the state's greenhouse gas emissions about today on the left-hand side. And what we see is that buildings represent about a quarter of the state's total emissions. And that encompasses both direct emissions from natural gas as well as upstream emissions from electricity consumption. Zooming in just on that natural gas consumption, about 80% of natural gas use in buildings comes from space heating and water heating. And unlike colder climates in other parts of the United States, water heating is almost equal actually to space heating in the state. And the remainder is represented by cooking and clothes drying and sundry other uses. So just a little bit more context, California has set ambitious climate goals, including reducing emissions 40% by 2030. We have a 50% renewable goal by 2030, at least 5 million zero-emission vehicles by 2030. We now have a 100% zero-carbon electricity goal by 2045. Those policies will contribute towards reducing the electricity sector emissions attributable to buildings. But we don't currently have a lot of policies directly targeting reductions in natural gas use in buildings. And we now have an executive order that is actually even more aggressive than the one that we originally started analyzing here at E3, which is to get to a carbon neutrality statewide by 2045. So from all of this work and from our analysis of how the state can meet these climate goals, we know that achieving those goals will require at least a 40% reduction in building sector emissions by 2030, and at least an 80% reduction by 2050, which is consistent with the roadmap goals that Panama outlined earlier. So how do we reduce emissions from buildings? One of the key strategies is electrifying those buildings. And what you're seeing here is an example of residential space heating. And on the left, you can see the share of new gas furnaces or HVAC sales on the left, and then the total number of equipment, the stock of that equipment on the right. And so in one of the scenarios that we've evaluated at E3 that is consistent with the state meeting its long-term climate goals, we assume that the state is able to transition to 100% sales of residential space heating technology being high efficiency heat pumps by 2040. The goal that Panama outlined is actually even more accelerated, which is to get to 100% sales by 2030. And we know that that reduces carbon, but what we didn't know going into this study was how realistic that transition was from a consumer economics perspective. And so setting up on this study, we really wanted to evaluate, well, are there economic barriers that would prevent this level of adoption? And what might other policy or technology barriers or changes need to be to achieve a high electrification future? So that was really the foundation for this work. So transitioning now to talking about the study that we did, we looked at sort of 3 phases of analysis. We started with a technology screening and really looking at what gas technologies and heat pump technologies, what electric end-use technologies are available in the market today. And Frontier Energy and Point Energy Innovations helped us with that technology screening. And we honed in on a set of building simulations that we wanted to run for both gas, mixed fuel homes, and electric homes. And that gave us results for hourly energy demand for both natural gas and electricity. As I mentioned before, we also worked with AECOM to develop a really bottom-up, California-specific representation of equipment, installation, and capital costs. And there we wanted to capture not just the cost of the equipment itself, but also the retrofit costs, labor costs, contractor markup. We really wanted to get kind of the complete representation of both new construction and retrofit costs. We used the energy simulation results from Frontier Energy to calculate bill savings and did that analysis on an hourly basis. And we combined the bill savings with the capital cost information to estimate life cycle costs. And then we also estimated greenhouse gas savings from building electrification and did a high-level screening looking at the grid impacts. The study is available at the link that you see there at the bottom. And as Stephen mentioned, the study was funded by Edison, LADWP, and SMUD. We evaluated 6 different climate zones that represent about 50% of the state's population. You can see the major cities represented from these climate zones. And these were selected primarily because they cover the service territories of the funders. We wanted to have a deep dive on the consumer economics in their service territories, but also because these climate zones represent the largest population centers in the state and also growing population centers in the state. We modeled 6 different building types. We looked at single-family and low-rise multifamily homes in this analysis, and we did 2 retrofit homes, a pre-1978 home, which has no insulation, single pane windows, a relatively smaller home. The 1990s vintage home was compliant with the building code as of 1992. And then we looked at a new construction home that complies with the 2019 Title 24 code. So it includes rooftop solar as part of the new construction package. The simulations that Frontier Energy did used BOPT and Energy Plus. And an important assumption that we made here is that we assumed that all of the retrofit homes that we were evaluating would include air conditioning. So if they didn't already include air conditioning, we assumed that they would upgrade to have air conditioning. And part of the reason that we did that was so that we could have an apples-to-apples comparison. Since heat pumps provide both space heating and space cooling, we wanted to compare that to a mixed fuel home with space heating and space cooling. We also think that's consistent with the trends that the state is moving towards, seeing higher saturation of air conditioning in homes. We evaluated gas and electric technologies for HVAC, water heating, cooking, and clothes drying. And we looked at 3 different types of electric heat pumps for HVAC, package terminal heat pumps, mini splits, and ducted split heat pumps. We looked at heat pump water heaters, replacing gas storage water heaters in retrofit homes. And in the new construction home, the counterfactual was a gas tankless water heater. And then we evaluated both electric resistance and induction electric stoves, as well as electric resistance and heat pump electric clothes dryers. And I should say that we have details in the report about all of the efficiencies assumed for each of these technologies. But in general, what we were assuming for the heat pumps is a technology that exceeds the code minimum, but is still representative of a commonly available technology. So we did evaluate what we call best in class or higher efficiency heat pump technologies in our sensitivity analysis. But for the base case analysis, we wanted to take kind of a representation of what might be most commonly adopted if someone was looking for a high efficiency product. So just to give a sense of that, if the code minimum for a heat pump is an HSPF of 8.2, for the mini split and ducted split heat pumps, we were modeling an HSPF of 10 to 11, just to kind of give some context. The gas furnace has an AFUE of 80 in these analysis. So moving on to the capital cost analysis. As Stephen mentioned at the outset, we were hoping to use existing kind of publicly available information for capital cost for both the gas equipment and the electric equipment that we were evaluating. But what we found is that while there was pretty good data about equipment costs, there wasn't very good data about installation costs, retrofit costs, labor costs, and we wanted to have a consistent database so that we could really compare apples to apples for the gas home and the electric home. And so that's why we brought in a professional cost estimator, Peter Morris from AECOM. And what you see on the right is an example of the workup that he did for us for every climate zone that we evaluated and every home type and every technology. And so there's, a line item for the demolition, the installation, the wiring, the labor, the markups, the permits, and the inspections. So we think we got at least a good sort of median representation of capital costs. I should note that when we look at replacing the HVAC system, we did make an adjustment to reflect the fact that it's unlikely that a gas furnace and an air conditioner would both burn out at the same time. So what we assumed is that we replace a gas furnace upon burnout and that there's some remaining economic life for the air conditioning unit that is being replaced by the heat pump. So we did make an adjustment for that. We also did apply a panel upgrade cost of about $4,000 for the pre-1978 retrofit homes when they were moving to an electric heat pump for HVAC and water heating. We also included avoided costs for natural gas infrastructure in the case of all electric new construction. And that's both in the home piping as well as the gas connection to the grid. And that was based on some data that we got from PG&E that's been used in some of the preliminary REACH code analysis that California has been doing. And then finally, I just want to note that, of course, homes are heterogeneous, particularly retrofit homes, and it's really a challenge to capture that diversity in this analysis. So what we're trying to estimate is kind of the most likely or a common example of cost in retrofit homes, but of course, in any individual home, you might have a different answer. So, your mileage will vary, and there's a lot of ways that costs could be higher or lower than what we've estimated here. So here's an example for single-family HVAC capital costs. And what we're showing here is 4 climate zones. And the bar on the left represents the total cost for a ducted furnace and an air conditioner. So that's both the furnace plus the AC. And then the bar on the right is the electric heat pump alternative. The darker blue bar represents the ductless mini splits. The middle blue bar is a ducted split heat pump. There's a lot of details in here, and the counterfactuals vary based on what case you're seeing, but what the general trends that emerged from this analysis is that we see capital cost savings when you're replacing a gas furnace and an air conditioner in most of the homes that we evaluated. The case where we saw the highest cost from electrification was in the climate zone 3 new construction, where there's no air conditioning in the mixed fuel home. But in all the other cases where there is air conditioning, in general, we see cost savings from the electric alternative. Now, this is an example for water heating, and here on the right, we're showing single family on the top and low-rise multifamily underneath there. And again, the bar on the left, the lighter pink bar, is the cost of the gas water heater, and the darker bar on the right is the cost of the heat pump water heater. And what we see here is that for the retrofit homes, where the counterfactual is a gas storage water heater, we see the heat pump water heater is more expensive from a capital cost perspective. In the new construction homes, where the counterfactual is a gas tankless water heater, we see capital cost savings. And some of that has to do with some avoided gas piping infrastructure and a simpler installation in the new construction. And that trend held for both single family as well as low-rise multifamily. So there's more detail in the report about all the capital cost savings, but that gives you a flavor of it. So now we'll move on to the bill savings analysis. And I want to start by saying that we did a pretty detailed look at consumer bills based on today's residential rate structures. So we evaluated time of use rates based on currently available time of use rates for PG&E, SMUD, and Southern California Edison. LADWP has a tiered rate, so we evaluated that in the LADWP service territories. And then what we're not showing here is we also did a detailed look at the gas rates, which in California for both PG&E as well as SoCalGas have tiers as well. And so there's some complex interactions that can happen with the tiered rates on the electric and the gas side. And what you can see just from this figure is that the electric tiered rates even vary by season. In Southern California, there's a different baseline. There's some fixed charges associated with both gas and electric rates. So all of those details actually do end up mattering quite a bit when we evaluate the rates. But overall, what we see is that having lower rates is more beneficial for electrification. And so in this analysis, SMUD and LADWP have the lowest electric rates. And so we see some more favorable economics, particularly for SMUD, because they have the sort of combined benefit of having both lower rates as well as time of use rates, which are somewhat beneficial towards electrification. So moving on to the average bill savings. And here, the way we define average bill savings is it's the present value of the bill savings over the lifetime of the equipment. So for HVAC, there's an 18-year lifetime. We have some projection around how electric and natural gas rates will change over time, but we assume that those rate structures stay the same. And then we look at the average bill savings over the lifetime. And for HVAC, what we see is positive bill savings in all of the cases that we evaluated. The highest savings are in SMUD service territory, up to $600 a year. And that's because, as I mentioned, SMUD has both lower rates and a beneficial time of use rate structure for electrification. Moving on to a water heater example, in the retrofit case, we see bill savings in all of the cases that we evaluated. And that's because the counterfactual is the less efficient gas storage water heater. In new construction, where the counterfactual is a gas tankless water heater, which is a bit more efficient, it's a little bit more of a mixed story. And here we see some interesting interactions with the tiered rates, leading to some of the variability between single family and low-rise multifamily homes. So summarizing those bill impact results, when we kind of weight the analysis for each of the climate zones and home types that we evaluated based on the population of homes in those climate zones and of those home types, we get these pie charts. And what we see is we see bill savings for all of the retrofits that we evaluated. And that's true even when we combine the HVAC replacement and the water heating. In the all-electric new construction, it's a little bit more of a mixed story, but we still see over half of the homes that we evaluated seeing bill savings. And you can see the gold wedge here has a bill increase of less than $100 per year, so still pretty favorable. And so this was actually pretty surprising to us. We weren't expecting the bill savings to look as good as they did, but this is really in part because we're evaluating some of the more efficient HVAC technologies, and a lot of the previous studies that we had been looking at were really looking at like a building code, kind of code compliant set of heat pump efficiencies. So now moving on to the life cycle savings, and here we're combining the capital cost assumptions that we presented previously with the bill savings to get a life cycle cost of ownership over the lifetime of the equipment or over the lifetime of the building. This table shows the equipment lifetimes that we used for this analysis. We take a net present value of the bill savings and bring it back to today to calculate life cycle costs using 3.35% discount rate. And I won't go through all of the details of the life cycle costs, but those are in the report if you're interested. So again, just jumping to the summary where we take the results for all of the climate zones and all of the simulations that we looked at, we see life cycle savings in 84% of the single family homes that we evaluated. We also see quite positive life cycle savings in all electric new construction. And the 24% there that you see where there is a life cycle cost increase, that is for the set of homes that we evaluated in San Francisco where the counterfactual does not have air conditioning. So this really highlights one of the key findings of the study, which is that electrification, particularly of HVAC, is positive when you also have some need for cooling in the home. And you can take advantage of the fact that a heat pump provides both space heating as well as space cooling. So moving on to the greenhouse gas savings and the grid impacts. We see greenhouse gas savings from electrification in all of the home types that we evaluated and over time. So the example that we're showing in this figure here is for a 1990s vintage single family home in Sacramento. The bar on the left are the total annual greenhouse gas emissions for the mixed fuel home. And then the bar on the right shows the all electric home. And you can see in this example, there's a 45% savings immediately, based on today's grid, essentially. Overall, we see about a 30 to 60% savings today, depending on the home type. And you can see that the majority of those savings are coming from the electrification of gas end uses in the home. So eliminating natural gas combustion is really the biggest way to save emissions. Over time, we also see some emission reductions due to assumed phase out of high global warming potential gases in new equipment sales. And that's both for air conditioning as well as refrigerators, freezers, and heat pumps. And we also think that we should be able to reduce natural gas leakage. And what we're estimating here includes upstream natural gas leakage from fuel production as well as delivery of natural gas. So overall, by 2050, we can get to an 80% or more reduction in natural gas in building emissions through electrification. Moving on to the grid impacts, we estimate what the combined impact of electrifying residential buildings would be looking across the study area that we evaluated. And what you can see on the y-axis here is that we're estimating the daily maximum load. This is the average kilowatt per household that is being consumed across the home types and climate zones that we evaluated. The gray bar represents 2020, and you can see that this is a summer peaking system. So when the air conditioning loads kick in, the electric demands increase. But as you move towards higher and higher penetrations of heat pumps, you see higher electric loads in the winter due to the electrification of space heating, and actually somewhat lower electric demands in the summer due to higher efficiency heat pumps relative to a conventional air conditioner. Overall, we expect that under at least average temperature conditions, we will still be a summer peaking system in California, even through 2050 under high penetration of residential heat pumps. This may not be true in other parts of the country where you have a much colder climate, but in California, we think it's quite possible that heat pumps will be operating without the need for backup electric resistance heat. So even though there's an increase in winter electricity demand, it's still not overtaking the summer air conditioning loads in the state. There may still be more regional distribution level grid impacts that warrant further study, but at least on the system-wide impacts, we're expecting, at least for the foreseeable future, to remain a summer peaking grid in California. So moving on to the key conclusions and recommendations. So starting with the greenhouse gas emissions, we see that electrifying homes can save 30 to 60% on greenhouse gas emissions today, and that those savings would increase over time as the grid gets cleaner and as we transition towards lower global warming potential refrigerant gases. We see big near-term opportunities for equipment and energy cost savings. So what we showed you earlier is that all electric new construction can save $130 to $540 per year relative to a gas home with air conditioning. So all electric new construction in homes with air conditioning is a really great place to start the market transformation needed for heat pumps. In retrofit situations, we saw 87% of the modeled homes with life cycle savings when you're electrifying HVAC and water heating together. And in SMUD, we saw that resulting in life cycle savings of up to $400 per year, which is kind of the upper bound, but still a lot of opportunities for cost-effective electrification in retrofits. And really what stands out from this analysis, I would say, is the cost effectiveness of the HVAC system in particular when you're replacing a gas furnace and an air conditioner. And so 100% of the homes that we evaluated saw life cycle savings in that case. There are barriers and challenges that remain. Some of those include in older homes, where you do need to do a panel upgrade to accommodate the higher electric loads associated with electrification. Homes that don't require air conditioning don't see the positive economics today from electrification. And we also see some cost barriers to electrifying cook stoves and clothes drying that would need to be overcome. So there's plenty of need for policy to overcome some of the non-economic barriers. What we were really surprised about, I think, going into this study, was that the economics are a lot more positive than we expected, but the adoption rates for heat pumps remains relatively low. And so what that tells us is that there's a lot of other barriers that need to be overcome in California. So that gets us to our recommendations, which is how do we overcome some of those barriers? One of those is incentivizing all electric new construction and updating the building code to enable that we think can help further the market transformation that's needed to get consumers more experience with these technologies. We also see a role for incentivizing high efficiency heat pumps in areas with air conditioning. Because the economics are already positive, the incentive there is really around overcoming any other kind of consumer barriers to adoption. We see an important role for efficient price signals in electric and natural gas rates. And just from this analysis, we saw how important having appropriate time of use rates looked for the consumer economics. Having relatively low electric rates obviously helps the economics of electrification. And then on the other side, having a higher carbon price or other policies that would reduce the carbon intensity of natural gas could also help reduce emissions in buildings, or at least sort of put electrification on more of an equal footing with natural gas use in buildings. We see a role for a market transformation initiative around building electrification, and this kind of gets to some of the roadmap goals that Panama outlined at the outset of this call, which is that there's not a lot of consumer education around these technologies. So even though the consumer economics look relatively good, if people aren't familiar with the technologies, they're not top of mind when you're doing a remodel, they're not going to happen. And there's a need for contractor and workforce training so that contractors can do a really good job with the install, so that they can make appropriate recommendations to customers who are thinking about retrofits, and make that process as seamless as possible. I know there's people on the phone that are working on retrofit-ready electrification technology options, so that the barriers to retrofits can be lower and you can have more of a plug-and-play option for a heat pump water heater, for example, with a lower voltage draw. All of those things would certainly help improve the economics and increase the adoption. And then we also see a role for technology transfer. So we know that there's higher efficiency products for heat pumps available in other parts of the world. California and the US really have not historically been a huge market for heat pumps the way that they are in Asia and parts of Europe. So bringing those technologies to California would be really beneficial. There's a lot of research in Japan, particularly around ultra-low global warming potential refrigerant gases, lower voltage heat pump options. I think there's a role for market transformation along all of those axes. And then finally, the CPUC and the CEC are already kind of working on how to align our energy efficiency goals with greenhouse gas savings. But I think there's more to come in that arena, and more work that can be done to ensure that we're both getting cost savings as well as greenhouse gas savings out of our energy efficiency programs. So with that, I will wrap it up and open it up for questions.
Wonderful.
Thank you for your time and attention.
Yes, thank you for the presentation on time, as always, and it's appreciated. We got a number of really great questions, so I'm just going to quickly run through them and see how many of them we can get through. And then you are available for communications offline. Is that correct, Amber?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay, fantastic. So the first question was, will we get a copy of this deck? And we will create a PDF shareable copy that members of the coalition will have access to on the coalition website afterwards. Amber, did you look at the effect of doing demand response or running the heat pump water heaters on timers in your analysis?
Yeah, we didn't have time to go through that here, but we did a sensitivity where we assumed that heat pump water heaters would be able to shift their loads to off-peak periods. So if we jump back up to those time of use figures, what we assumed is that we were able to have no heat pump loads during the highest time of use peak period, which you can see on this figure is, sort of 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. We did see some benefits from that flexible water heating load, but I don't think the benefits were as big as we were hoping or expecting. And part of the reason for that is the fact that the time of use periods here really don't have a lot of difference. We saw the largest savings in Southern California, Edison, because if you look at the time of use rates here, there's actually a lower demand, immediate, or a lower charge if you can shift off peak. So we saw the biggest benefit from flexibility based on SCE's time of use rate. So I think that's certainly an area where more work can be done, but in order to really capture the benefits of flexible loads, we need to have a way to monetize those, either through rate design or other delivery mechanisms.
Great, thank you. I'm going to combine the next two together. How do the economics change when electrification is paired with photovoltaics, which presumably could power the appliances with cheaper electricity than grid purchase? And then did you look at the effect of coupling electrification with PV and battery storage?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. So we did model rooftop solar on new construction, but we modeled it consistent with what the code requires. So there was the same size rooftop panel on the all-electric home and the mixed fuel home. And so we didn't see a huge sort of relative benefit between the mixed fuel home and the electric home because they have both have the same size solar panels. Now, if you were to install a larger solar panel on the all-electric home, to take greater advantage of the fact that there's higher electric loads, and thus you can take more advantage of the net energy metering rules in the state, you would see more benefit. But we didn't model that particular case because that would come with an additional cost of more rooftop solar and wasn't what the code required. We didn't look at the benefits of combining a larger rooftop solar system with a battery system. And I think that's a really interesting research question.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to keep running through these, see as many as we can get in here. On the grid impact slide that you put up, did you look at the impact of a changing climate on cooling demand?
No, in this analysis we didn't. In our previous work for the CEC, we did a 2018 publication. We did estimate the ways in which the number of cooling degree days would increase and the number of heating degree days would decrease. But we weren't able to incorporate that into this analysis. So if anything, we would expect to see, due to climate change, more air conditioning loads and less heating demand. But I want to qualify that this analysis is also assuming kind of average weather. So this is maybe like a 1 in 2 weather year. You may have more weather extremes as well that could lead to higher peak demands in winter or in summer due to just climate variability.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Here's a question, more of a statement. It's about when you mentioned refrigerants and fugitive natural gas. The questioner would have liked to have a mention that those greenhouse gases are order of magnitudes more effective than CO2 at trapping heat. Did you take that into any of your analysis? Did that affect any of your analysis in any way?
Yeah. So this analysis assumes a 100-year global warming potential for CO2, methane leaks, and refrigerant leakage in order to put everything on kind of equal footing. And I know there's a lot of people that prefer to see a 20-year global warming potential applied with this type of analysis. We used 100-year because that's consistent with what the Air Resources Board does in their emissions inventory. But certainly the point is true that these gases have very different implications for the climate.
Okay, great. Not great, but thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
Did you analyze the thermal storage aspect of heat pump water heaters and how that helps with decarbonization?
Yeah, so I think that gets to the earlier question about the capabilities of heat pump water heaters to be used as a flexible load. Since there's some thermal storage ability, you could shift some of the load to away from peak cost periods, which is what we talked about before. I think is that
yep.
Spirit of the question?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Did you consider hydronic heat pump systems, one heat pump with a water storage tank, providing both water heating and ducted space heating?
So not for single family and low rise multifamily. I know there are some homes that have hydronic systems, and that's a really exciting opportunity. But no, that was not part of this scope of work. I think that's also a really good area to investigate for high rise or high rise multifamily. That would be a good technology to look at there as well.
Okay, great. And I think you somewhat addressed this in your recommendations, but have you explored new lower voltage and lower current heat pump water heaters to reduce panel and wiring upgrade costs in any of your analysis?
No, we didn't look at that here, but we call that out as an important way to reduce some of the retrofit costs for building electrification. And I think there's, as I mentioned, I think there's a lot of ongoing work there, and so some exciting opportunities that could lower some of these adoption barriers.
Great. Next question is, how can any of the registrants access the cost assumptions on heat pumps, heating, and water heating compared to gas that you used in your analysis?
Yeah, so, I mean, we have the figures in the report, but I guess if a registrant wanted the detailed spreadsheets, we would have to get permission from the funders to share those.
Okay, but there are some figures in the report.
Yeah, we have detailed figures, kind of like the ones that we showed here for all of the technologies that we evaluated.
Great.
And we have that for both single family and low-rise multifamily.
Great. For multifamily building examples, did you look at central water heating systems as well as individual water heaters?
No, that we didn't. That kind of gets to the question around hydronic systems as well. But the low-rise multifamily homes, I'll just revisit what we looked at. We looked at package terminal heat pumps for some of the low-rise multifamily, and then we looked at mini split heat pumps and ducted split heat pump systems.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned that there was some potential cost, negative cost impacts for cooking and for clothes drying. What's the scale of that cost impact? Are we talking about significant amounts of money or small amounts of money?
Yeah, I actually have a slide on that in the appendix that I can jump to. Here we go. Well, let's see. I'll just start with the capital costs. So the capital costs of an electric resistance and a gas dryer are about equivalent. A heat pump clothes dryer is, you can see here, about $8,000 more expensive. $800 more expensive. And then on the cook stoves, we see there's quite a range depending on the quality. And so from a capital cost perspective, there's not a huge difference between gas and electric.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving to the utility bills, we see for electric cooking costs on the order of about $80 per year. So not huge, but you know, that's kind of the worst case. We do see some examples where the costs are basically negligible or even slightly positive. And then for the clothes drying, we see costs ranging from, you know, pretty negligible in the worst case to, $150 to $200 per year on the bill savings. So the heat pump clothes dryers perform a little bit better from a bill perspective, but a little bit worse from a capital cost perspective. So overall, we see the market still driving more towards electric resistance clothes drying, at least in the near term. So, not huge costs, but that's what they look like.
Okay, great. And then the last question we have is, what impact would energy efficiency retrofits or natural stock turnover have on that 1990s vintage home that might deviate from the 1990 Title 24 specs?
Yeah, well, maybe I can answer that question by showing this figure. So this figure on the bottom here represents our estimate of the stock of buildings for single family and low-rise multifamily by vintage. So the 1990s vintage homes are assumed to sort of shrink over time, certainly as a share of the building stock, but also to undergo, some portion of those homes will undergo deep retrofits and be brought up to code and become more efficient over time. But they are still expected to represent a very large share of that, class of buildings, built after 1978 and up through essentially today, are still representing a large share of the total building stock over time. So having retrofit options that work for those homes will be important.
Fantastic. Any last comments, Amber? That was the last question. Good job getting through those. Any last comments before I finish this up?
No, I just want to say, thank you for your interest and your attention. And there's a lot more detail in the report if you want to dig into the details.
Fantastic. So you can find that report on E3's website. We are going to have a recording of this presentation available. It'll be sent out to all the registrants of this webinar. And we'll also be sending around a PDF of the PowerPoint. We'll also have those available to members of the coalition on the coalition website. As I said, this is the first of our webinar series, Building Decarbonization Coalition Presents. We're going to be having top speakers like Amber come in at least once a month, potentially twice a month, some months, to present on new products, new research, new activities in the field of building decarbonization. So love to have you as a member of the coalition so that we can let you know when we're going to be having these webinars. You can see the link at the bottom of the slide that Amber has up there about how to get access to this report. So thank you to Amber, and thank you to all the participants today for all the questions and the attention. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Building Decarbonization Coalition Presents webinar series. Take it easy, everybody. Keep decarbonizing.
Thanks, all. Bye.